Hello, and welcome to the Battleship Brawl Companion. I'm Evil for Zergan, and this episode I'll be reviewing the Victory class gun carrier by Shieldmate. This is perhaps a more conventional ship than many of the ones we've seen so far, but there are still some interesting things about it. So let's get to it. As usual, I'll start with maneuverability, firing up the engines here. See, that's only using a fraction of its power, meaning it's got some extra power to spare in case some gets destroyed. Even though it's only using about a third of its power, we're making a pretty decent speed of about 19 meters per second. This is due to a pretty sharp bow here. Most of the parts are 4-meter slopes, which have quite little drag. If we go to the drag view mode, you'll see that the ones that actually matter, the red ones, are actually not counted in the drag computation. All the ones at the front are green. The thrust is provided by a bunch of huge propellers, many of which are at the bottom. This is a decent amount below the center of mass, although not terribly far, given that this ship has a shallow draft. So the uppitch is almost unnoticeable, at least when the ship is undamaged. Shieldmate has posted some screenshots in the forum where the front of the ship was damaged and therefore lightened, and thus the propellers were able to move the ship into a radical up-pitch. Up-pitch may not always be a bad thing. If the bow of the ship is lifted out of the water, this can actually reduce the drag on the ship. Unfortunately, if it goes too far and your ship goes vertical, then you're going to have a hard time shooting through your own ship. Although with a long enough barrel, it is possible to clip through your own ship. But more worryingly, you're presenting a large above-water target, and if you're totally vertical, your ship won't be moving much at all. So it's a possible, though somewhat risky, strategy. Next, I'll talk about protection. The ship as a whole is not terribly heavily armored. We've got a 2-wood thick deck and a daggly metal bottom and sides of the hull, which are less likely to be hit given their sloping in from the direction of likely incoming fire. The important parts of the ship are pretty heavily armored. You can see the AI and ammo in particular are having both metal and heavy armor beams, so they're going to be quite hard to take out. Less critical components such as engines have some extra metal armor, which will still make them reasonably durable. If we look at the turrets themselves, Shieldmate has elected to have deck-mounted turrets mounted flush with the deck, with ample on-deck armor. On-turret armor. The turret seat is also made out of metal, which will help prevent explosions from having an easy time going under the side of the turret. Although there is still a possibility that they will do so, because of, from the depths, somewhat strange explosion rules. If the deck is intact and a explosion hits the deck, the blocks of the deck don't actually directly block the explosion from traveling under and into the turret. However, if the explosion happens above, like on the undamaged deck, then there's also a rule that explosions cannot go to a grid cell if going to that grid cell would bring it nearer to the origin of the explosion. So while the explosion can sort of phase into the deck, it can't phase back up into the turret if the explosion happened on the deck. Now, if the deck were damaged and the explosion happened somewhere lower than that, there is a small possibility that the turret could be damaged from below. But that's probably not going to happen often enough to be a huge factor. On the other hand, with cram explosions being as powerful as they are, even an explosion that hits the armor of the turret could easily do quite a bit of damage to the turret, blowing through the armor. So, all in all, these turrets will be somewhat more easy to hit than easy to affect with explosions than the more common recessed turrets who only have their barrel structure above the hull. But apart from that, these turrets are pretty well constructed. Let's look into one of these turrets. As far as I can tell, they are all the same. We've got a 1585mm, a sort of moderate-ish size diameter turret in terms of gauge. The ammo setup is sub and wide, arranged in quite an efficient manner, similar to some of the more efficient ones we've seen so far. Like the Archangelsk, the local weapon controllers are mounted on the turret themselves. And there is the components on the bottom of the turret are reasonably durable. Cram gauge increasers have 10 armor and a decent amount of hit points. So even if some explosive damage goes up through the bottom, they'll at least have a little durability. Unfortunately, the same cannot be said for all the components, like the local weapon controller and its attachments. But probably not too much of a liability compared to the durability of the turret overall. In accordance with its efficient setup, the turret has a decent amount of ammo and quite a large number of effective material boxes. The largest contributor is hardening material. 71.5 I'd consider perhaps a bit on the high side for these cannons, especially given that they are time for impact fuses. Generally, and pretty short ones. I would expect not to be attacking heavy armor the majority of the time, which is where the really high armor piercing values come into play. These are the second place material box are fragment boxes. I tend to prefer explosives, but again, it is true that materials can potentially damage objects further from the point of explosion than with explosive materials. But overall, very well constructed guns. Now, one last thing I want to show here is that sub-objects do not collide with other sub-objects. So if I switch to the all-weapon group and go to the broadside, you can see that the turrets are clearly clipping through each other. Now, Shieldmate has put fail-safes on these turrets, so hopefully they won't shoot each other. I generally tend to rely on explicit turret restrictions rather than failsafes, but the failsafes seem to have done their job decently well. I don't remember seeing any self-inflicted damage in the first battle. So this will probably allow a full broadside, especially at longer ranges where you expect more elevation from the turrets, uh, and therefore they have a better chance of being able to fire over each other. Overall, it's a pretty solid design in all the major respects. Protection is well constructed. The speed is solid, a solid 19 meters per second, and the 12 guns is a perfectly respectable armament for a vessel this size. So I think this stands a decent chance at going a good distance in the tournament. Best of luck to Shieldmate, and I'll see you all next time.